What would drive someone to make a decision that would cost them their life just 7 days after losing their soulmate? Welcome to True Crime Chronicles HQ channel. Today, we're diving into a story so tragic, so heartbreaking, that it will make you question how grief can completely transform a person. This is the story of Maria, a 47-year-old woman whose world came crashing down in the most unimaginable way possible. Before we begin, I want you to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because stories like this remind us how precious and fragile life really is. And please, stay with me until the end because there's a lesson here that could save someone you love. 7 days. That's all it had been. Just 1 week since Maria had buried the love of her life, her husband of 23 years, Thomas. Cancer had taken him slowly, painfully, and Maria had watched helplessly as the man who had been her everything slowly faded away. Friends and family described Maria as a devoted wife, a woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to caring for her husband through his illness. She had barely slept, barely eaten, pouring every ounce of her being into fighting a battle they both knew they couldn't win. The aftermath of loss. But here's what nobody talks about when someone loses their spouse: the deafening silence that follows, the empty house, the cold bed, the coffee maker that now only needs to brew 1 cup. Maria was drowning in a grief so deep, so consuming, that those closest to her said she seemed like a completely different person. Her sister, Carmen, later told investigators that Maria had called her that morning, crying hysterically. "I can't do this," Maria had sobbed into the phone. "I don't know who I am without him. I don't know how to exist in this world alone." But grief, as we're about to see, can make people do things that are completely out of character, things that, in their right mind, they would never even consider. That afternoon, Maria received a phone call that would seal her fate. It was about Carlos, a man she had apparently developed feelings for during her husband's final months. Whether this was a source of comfort during her darkest hours or something more complicated, we may never fully understand. What we do know is that another woman, Sandra, had also been involved with Carlos. And when Sandra found out about Maria, she was furious. The phone call that day was Sandra demanding that Maria stay away from her man. The confrontation. Now, here's where this story takes a turn that nobody could have predicted. The Maria that her family knew, the quiet, devoted wife who had never hurt a fly, that Maria would have hung up the phone, maybe cried a little, and moved on with her life. But this wasn't that Maria anymore. This was a woman who had lost everything that mattered to her, who was grasping at anything that might fill the void in her heart. And in that moment, Carlos represented hope, maybe the only hope she felt she had left. Against all logic, against the pleas of her family, who begged her to stay home, Maria got in her car and drove to Sandra's neighborhood. She was going to fight for this man, this connection, this last thread of meaning in her shattered world. The tragic ending. Music becomes intense but frank. What happened next is almost too horrific to comprehend. The confrontation escalated quickly. Sandra wasn't alone. She had called several friends and family members. What started as an argument between 2 grieving women became something far more sinister. The details are difficult to share, but the facts speak for themselves. Maria, this 47-year-old woman who was still wearing her husband's wedding ring, was shot 119 times. 119 times. Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't just murder. This was an execution fueled by rage, jealousy, and a complete disregard for human life. Maria's body was found hours later by police, and the scene was so brutal that even seasoned investigators were shaken. The investigation and arrests. The investigation moved quickly. Sandra and 4 others were arrested within 48 hours. Security cameras, witness testimonies, and phone records painted a clear picture of premeditated violence. During interrogations, Sandra showed no remorse. She actually told police that Maria got what she deserved for trying to take what wasn't hers. The callousness of that statement still sends chills down my spine. The aftermath. Maria's funeral was held just 10 days after her husband's. The same church, many of the same mourners. but this time the grief was mixed with shock, anger, and disbelief. How had their beloved Maria, who had just buried her soulmate, ended up dead over a man she barely knew? Her sister Carmen gave a statement that broke everyone's hearts. "My sister wasn't herself. The Maria who died that day wasn't the Maria we knew and loved. Grief had taken our Maria long before those bullets did." The legal consequences. Sandra was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her accomplices received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years. But here's what haunts me about this case. No amount of justice can bring Maria back or undo the senseless tragedy that unfolded. This story forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about grief, desperation, and the lengths people will go to when they feel they have nothing left to lose. Maria's story isn't just about a love triangle gone wrong. It's about a woman who lost her anchor in life, and in her desperate search for meaning, made a decision that cost her everything. It's about how quickly situations can escalate when emotions run high and rational thinking goes out the window. But it's also about the other side, about Sandra and her friends who chose violence as their solution, who decided that another human being deserved to die over a man who, frankly, wasn't worth either of their lives. The warning signs we missed. Looking back, there were warning signs that Maria was in crisis. The dramatic personality change, the isolation from family, the desperate clinging to this new relationship. These are classic signs of someone who needs help, not judgment. Her family has since become advocates for grief counseling and mental health awareness. They want people to understand that grief can be a mental health emergency and that sometimes people need intervention to save them from themselves. So what can we learn from this tragedy? First, that grief is not a weakness. It's a medical condition that sometimes requires professional help. If someone you love has lost a spouse, especially after a long illness, they need support, monitoring, and sometimes intervention. Second, that violence is never the answer. Sandra had options. She could have walked away, called the police, gotten a restraining order. Instead, she chose to become a killer, and now she'll spend the rest of her life in prison. Third, that desperation makes people do things that seem impossible. The Maria who fought over a man she barely knew was not the same Maria who had lovingly cared for her dying husband. Trauma changes people in ways we can't always predict or understand. If you're watching this and you're going through grief, please know that you're not alone. There are resources, there are people who care, and there is hope even in your darkest moments. The pain you're feeling is temporary, even though it doesn't feel that way right now. If you know someone who's grieving, check on them. Don't just ask if they're okay. Really look at them. Are they eating, sleeping, making decisions that seem out of character? Sometimes being a good friend means stepping in when someone can't save themselves. Maria's story ended in tragedy, but it doesn't have to be meaningless. If her death can save even one person from making a similar decision, if it can help one family recognize the warning signs of someone in crisis, then maybe there's some purpose in this pain. Let's honor Maria's memory, not by the way she died, but by the 47 years she lived as a devoted wife, loving sister, and caring friend. And let's commit to being the kind of people who choose compassion over violence, help over judgment, and love over hate. If this story touched you, please share it. Someone in your life might need to hear it. And remember to check on your loved ones. Sometimes the person who seems the strongest is the one who's falling apart inside. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves and each other.